The Honorable Penelope Beckles Robinson, Leader of the Opposition, Member of Parliament for Arima and Political Leader of the People's National Movement. The Honorable Brian Manning, Member of Parliament for San Fernando East. Senator Dr. Amory Brown, Leader of Opposition Business in the Senate. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, locked on virtually. We thank you all for being here for another Opposition Media Conference. My name is Hans Devines, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West. And once again, we stand here in defense of democracy. Again, we've seen the government undermine so many institutions and areas that have been pillars of Trinidad and Tobago, who we are as a society, who we are as a country, and how we continue to thrive economically. Unfortunately, the undermining of these things have great results. But have no fear. The People's National Movement, the opposition, we are here to stand in defense of you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and in defense of democracy. So the first issue we are going to address today, we're going to address many of the companies moving out of Trinidad and Tobago and the effects it will have on you as a citizen and what it means for our economy. So to start us off today, we welcome the Honorable Brian Manning, Member of Parliament for San Fernando East.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's a very difficult time in the manufacturing sector of Trinidad and Tobago at this point. We recently heard of Nestle and what's happening there, where they're attempting to divest their local assets here in Trinidad and Tobago. But that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who has been paying attention. The divestment of local Nestle's operations would, of course, bring great consternation to many of the farmers in Trinidad and Tobago. There were 60 dairy farmers attached to Nestle, and of course all of their dependents. They're the main producer of fresh milk in Trinidad and Tobago. It causes concern in that industry. And when we look at what it is this government has done in the manufacturing sector across the board, I think it's safe to say that the Trinidad and Tobago government has created a hostile environment for manufacturers in Trinidad and Tobago. So there's no surprise. I've read some very harrowing reports from many of the farmers attached to Nestle. And it's very concerning because I don't believe the government understands exactly the kind of effects that they're having on employment in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of what they did. But looking at what the government did in the last budget, we can see all of the additional costs that have been added to manufacturers. And keep in mind, the manufacturing sector of Trinidad and Tobago is maybe the second largest generator of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago after the energy sector. And that is why previous PNM governments went out of our way to ensure that the manufacturing sector received preferential treatment. One such treatment would have come from the Exim Bank, where they were able to access US dollars. Because they were generating US dollars, we allowed them to have access to US dollars so that we could increase the supply of US dollars locally. This government came into office and completely did away with that system. So now local manufacturers, including Nestle, have been finding it very difficult to get the US dollars that they need to really perform and to operate their functions in Trinidad and Tobago. They also added an electricity surcharge. Now, manufacturing is an energy-intensive business, which means it mainly depends. One of its largest costs would be electricity. Trinidad and Tobago has the largest manufacturing sector in the CARICOM region. Now, that is because of the competitive advantage of low-cost electricity. This government saw it in its wisdom to dramatically add a commercial electricity surcharge to all manufacturers and commercial operators in Trinidad and Tobago, which has dramatically reduced that competitive advantage. If you go on store shelves throughout the CARICOM region, you will see goods produced right here in Trinidad and Tobago, which have created, employment for thousands of people. Why would a government want to undermine one thing that has been attracting investors in the manufacturing sector here in Trinidad and Tobago? It simply doesn't make any sense, and this government simply has no rhyme or reason to the way it's operating. Coming out of the last budget also, there was a tax on single-use plastics items, 5% of SIF. This also would have negatively affected Nestle and other manufacturers in Trinidad and Tobago. customs and excise duty, there was a 100% increase on duties on all containers arriving at the port of Trinidad and Tobago. Not a 5%, 10%, 100% increase. That, of course, added a cost to all imported items. Many of the inputs in the local manufacturing sector would have been imported. So that also affected cost. We have other indirect costs, such as, excuse me, 0.25% levy on banks and insurers. That would increase the financing costs of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago. So as you can see, the government has done nothing at all to assist the manufacturing sector of Trinidad and Tobago. And everything that they have done would have negatively affected a very low margin business. When I say low margin business, manufacturing sector would have a small profitability margin. So that means it's very sensitive to an increase in costs. And the main competitive drive of the manufacturing sector is the cost of electricity. So the previous government had worked diligently to really have many of these trade agreements that you're now seeing coming to fruition. We have one with Chile, one with Curacao, and I've even heard talk of us joining the Mercosur trade arrangement. Those trade agreements were designed for us to take advantage of our competitive advantage in low-cost manufacturing here in Trinidad and Tobago and expand markets to create more employment and foreign exchange right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Our government, in its wisdom, has decided to eliminate much of that competitive advantage while still opening up our markets to many of these trade agreements. What effect do you think that's going to have on local manufacturing and local producers? Oops. Yeah, not a good one, as you can see. Right on cue. Right, so there just seems to be no rhyme or reason to the government policy. You have the Minister of Foreign Affairs and CARICOM Affairs going in one direction, while the Minister of Finance is going in another direction, the Minister of Trade and Industry going in yet another direction. There is no cohesion or unity to what is going on, and it is negatively affecting everything that we're doing here in Trinidad and Tobago. Some other points on the manufacturing sector. Let me give you an idea of what the manufacturing sector is in Trinidad and Tobago. The GDP shared is 19% of the national GDP. That's significant. Employs about 50,000 workers across industries. And in exports, it's about $12.8 billion in 2023 and 25% of total exports. In the past year, we have seen a virtual collapse in the manufacturing exports of Trinidad and Tobago. In 2023, this is recovery from pandemic era lows, we had an export value of $7.82 billion from the manufacturing sector. $7.82 billion. In 2024, we had $7.91 billion. That is a 1.2% increase in exports from the manufacturing sector. But in 2025, what did we see? A precipitous fall of minus 13.7% in exports from the manufacturing sector down to $6.82 billion. That is not a coincidence. So it reduces our supply of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago, one, and it also reduces their ability to employ people in this country. So when you come to Parliament and you hear members of this government talking about blue skies ahead in terms of our economy, we keep asking, where are those blue skies? Where are those blue skies supposed to come from? When we see strange employment numbers coming from the CSO, where they can say in one quarter there's been a dramatic increase in unemployment, and then the next quarter a dramatic fall in unemployment, we are asking, where exactly have those people been employed? Because across our economy, we are seeing difficulties coming straight from the policies of this government, and it is a difficult time right now for employment. Anyone who's an MP in this country and has spent any time in their constituency, walking, meeting with residents, will tell you that we have a severe unemployment issue in this country. I know during my office hours, during the last administration, it went from people coming to see you to say, I want a house, to now where people are saying, I want a job. It has switched overnight. And you go to communities in San Fernando East and elsewhere where everyone is unemployed. Yet the government is singing another song that is completely out of tune with what is actually going on the ground here in Trinidad and Tobago. We are asking that this Minister of Finance get off his high horse and take a look at some of these policies that are strangling businesses in this country and are making our manufacturing sector less viable and less competitive. It makes no sense at all that we sign on to these international trade agreements and open up our economy to competitors from abroad when this government is essentially tying one hand behind the backs of many local producers, making them incapable of competing against international players. Many of these international players would have an advantage in terms of scale, in terms of size. They would have domestic markets that are far larger than Trinidad and Tobago. Our reduced energy price was the one advantage that we had here in Trinidad and Tobago that gave our manufacturers a fighting chance. Our genius government decided that the first thing they should do coming into office is to eliminate that advantage. We are asking them to please review what they have done. They are harming Trinidad and Tobago. Many of the multinationals that want to invest in Trinidad and Tobago, we are not the only game in town. There are other countries around this world that have competitively priced electricity and energy. Same thing in the energy sector, where we would have offered competitive prices on gas to attract foreign direct investment in the first place. And then after, these companies would have spent billions of dollars to create operations here in Trinidad and Tobago. We decide now is a good time to increase those prices, not realizing that it's a simple matter for many international energy producers to shift their operations from Trinidad and Tobago to elsewhere. We are not the only country in the world with gas. We're not the only country in the world with competitively priced electricity. And this government has to come to terms with that and realize that, or the only loser in this back and forth will be the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, MP Brian Manning. I want to take some time to touch on some issues affecting us as a country in terms of culture and some other matters. And before I get into that, I want to extend my condolences to the family and friends of cultural icon, dancer, poet, comedian, MC, and panman, Paul Emmanuel Cecil Bill Trotman, and may his soul rest in peace. Today, to you, the members of the media and the national community, I ask the question: as a country, are we truly doing enough to protect and value our culture and support the people who carry our culture along around the world and fly our national flag? Culture and entertainment are not just simply assets that we pull out of a cupboard once a year to celebrate a win. They form our collective identity, and these individuals earn a living off of culture, entertainment, and the arts. I want to remind you, under People's National Movement administration, the steel pan was officially made the national musical instrument of Trinidad and Tobago. Under the PNM, the steel pan was geotagged as intellectual property, meaning no matter where else in the world a pan may be made, there's a specific distinction with a pan made in Trinidad and Tobago. Much like sparkling wine may be for champagne in France, it's the same concept. A steel pan from Trinidad and Tobago, there's a geotagging attached to that. Under the PNM, the steel pan was put on our coat of arms, and under the PNM, we celebrated the first ever World Steel Pan Day on August 11th, 2023. Under the PNM, the national instrument was shown respect. We are witnessing across our cultural landscape of our nation something that is deeply disturbing, and it is a pattern of administrative disrespect. About a week and a half ago, pan players finally got their allowances from Carnival 2026. And if you look at the picture, you would even see how almost upset the minister was looking in her facial expression to pay these pan people their money. There's an underlying issue and an underlying situation where pan is being disrespected. It is our national treasure, and our cultural icons are suffering behind the scenes. When our artists are broke, when our steel bands are being mistreated on the ground, the Minister of Culture is vanishing into thin air. Today, the silence must end. We stand here to demand concrete answers. So the main issue, the current issue, or the most recent issue, the events involving members of Silver Star Steel Orchestra this past weekend have raised serious national concern. And what makes it even more concerning is the actual minister was at that event and up to this day has said nothing in defense, in conversation and consultation with any member of the steel band movement or any member of Silver Star Steel Orchestra. We are aware of the statements that have entered the public domain. Silver Stars has issued their own, very detailed. The TPS has issued its position, stating that the matter is now before the courts. Judicial process must take its course. However, regardless of where anyone stands on the legal issues, there's a broader question that deserves the answer. How do we engage our cultural practitioners? Could the situation have been handled differently? And does our Minister of Culture, missing Micheline Michel from Aruga, have anything to say about this and defend those that she's in charge of governance for, the steel pan movement? Let us be entirely clear who we're talking about. These are not criminals. These are professional musicians, disciplined young people. For any of you all that have ever been to a panyard around carnival time, it takes a lot of discipline to have 80 people playing the same thing at the same time in the same way together as one. It is a true symbol of unity in our country. These are decorated cultural ambassadors of the national instrument of Trinidad and Tobago. They carry our flag, they preserve our heritage, and they present the absolute best of our youth. And we must commend President Mrs. Beverly Ramsey Moore and the members of the Pan Trinbago executive who, funny enough, we've seen one of our government ministers disrespect publicly. I shall not call his name on this platform or any other. Does not deserve it. In an official media release, Pan Trinbago rightly reminded this country that steel bands are living institutions of learning, mentorship, and community development. I asked the citizens of this country again, where was our Minister of Culture while this indignity was taking place? She was probably just walking out to the fete. Is the minister going to remain silent on this? Is she just going to look the other way? Or is she going to speak up for these individuals? This is the worst pan men have been treated since the 1960s, when there was a time of violence in the steel pan movement. There are questions to be answered. And even the Emancipation Support Committee came out and addressed the issue, calling on the Commissioner of Police to let cooler heads prevail. So that's what I want to say on that. Now, regarding the Emancipation Support Committee, the Emancipation Support Committee was only paid in May 2026 for their activities in 2025. I'll repeat that. They were only paid in May 2026 for their activities in August 2025. In other words, the Emancipation Support Committee had to negotiate, beg, plead with suppliers to wait for payment. Now, I want you to put this into perspective. We are now in July. Emancipation is in August, at the beginning of August. Up to this moment, the Emancipation Support Committee does not know what their allocation is going to be for 2026. This after just recently being paid their allocation for 2025. How are they supposed to put on this village that we know is part of our cultural fabric and all of the associated emancipation activities? Again, a damage to culture in Trinidad and Tobago. We are seeing pervasive ignoring of the needs of the culture of Trinidad and Tobago by this administration. Added to which, on a very small note, I just want the media to note it, ask the people that you need to ask. There's been non-payment to most vendors for Flavor Village. Among these vendors are cultural icons. They asked me not to call their name in any platform, but we do have some cultural icons that performed at the Flavor Village that are in need of their payments, and they have not been paid yet for Flavor Village. How can the Minister of Culture, how can the Prime Minister stand up there and say the best carnival ever, and the people that make the carnival move are unpaid? You answer that question, Trinidad and Tobago. Actually, no, you don't answer it. Let the Minister of Culture answer it. Let the Prime Minister answer that question for you. And I beg you to ask them why those vendors from Flavor Village have not been paid, and why Best Village artists have not been paid from last year as well. These are the questions that we must ask. I asked the question here some weeks ago, and I'll ask it again. Where is the Sport and Culture Fund Board? There still is no board for the Sport and Culture Fund. The Sport and Culture Fund is a fund that actually helps people that may have travel for their sporting teams, people that may have additional emancipation or Diwali activities in their communities. These are the things that the Sport and Culture Fund in the past has helped. And there's no Sport and Culture Fund Board, which means there are quite a few people, sport and cultural practitioners, that are not getting the best possible outcomes from this government and funding that they need for their initiatives. So again, we ask, where is missing Micheline Michel from Moruga concerning culture? And regarding sports, I'll touch on this quickly as well. The Member of Parliament for San Fernando constantly mentions the pool in his area that has not been repaired. People in La Hoqueta, people in Mova, they're all mentioning the pools in their areas that have gone to the worst. And people are asking, what's the problem with these pools? They're asking, what's the problem? But the question is the same as the answer, my friends. What's the problem? The minister, that is the problem. What's the problem? The question and the answer are the same. And no money in the midterm review for sports, which means the government has shown that they do not care about these communities and they do not care about sports. Scant regard. And recently we had our athletes that were trying to go to the NACAC games, and they had to deal with a reduced team going to the actual games in Mexico. What is that? What is that? The minister swept in last minute and he found a way. But why couldn't they find a way before? Why couldn't they give comfort to these athletes? Give them an amount, let them understand how much extra they need to raise. But instead, forcing them into a corner to carry a reduced team to the games. And this is not the first time. We've seen it with our tennis players, we've seen it with our hockey players, we've seen it with the junior tournaments. What is going on? The question and the answer are the same. What's the problem? So, members of the media, I want to congratulate all our athletes that have been representing our country, that have been doing so under very strenuous circumstances. Our powerlifting champions, Rondell Hunt and Joseph McDonald, all our athletes that participated in the Barbados Grand Prix and all other events. So, to the Minister of Culture, break your silence. Provide this country with a definitive, transparent timeline with regards to payments, and stand up for our cultural practitioners. They need your voice because you are the minister that represents their interest. To the national authorities, we ask you to do the right thing and treat our cultural practitioners with respect. We ask for the appointment of a Sport and Culture Fund Board again, and we ask for respect to our athletes. We need our Minister of Culture and Community Development and our Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs to come to the head of the table and defend the people that are asking for them to represent their needs and interests in Parliament. But in their absence, I will tell you, if and when they do not stand up, we on this side will continue to hold them to account and stand in defense of cultural practitioners, athletes, and every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. We stand in defense of democracy and defense of Trinidad and Tobago because our country deserves better. So this is where I end my statement, and I'd like to now welcome Senator Dr. Amory Brown to deal with some matters of foreign affairs and international relations that our government has continued to fumble on.
Thank you very much, Brother Hans de Veens, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West. I also recognize the presence of MP Brian Manning of the great constituency of San Fernando East. And of course, the presence, participation, and leadership of our leader, the leader of the opposition and the political leader of the People's National Movement, the Honorable Penelope Beckles Robinson. And you know, as we all looked at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting and the participation of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I know there would have been many citizens, I was certainly one of them, who can't wait for the day that Trinidad and Tobago is properly and appropriately represented by a Prime Minister of the caliber and class of Penelope Beckles Robinson. That being said, and that day shall come, that being said, on Tuesday of this week, there was a very important vote at the United Nations General Assembly. And we were very, very troubled by some of the proceedings coming out of the General Assembly and the role and involvement of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, we've, at the opposition, have been sounding a warning consistently that this government is carrying this country in a direction that no right-thinking citizen should support, particularly with respect to our regional and international position. That was further, those concerns were further cemented this week, because on Tuesday, there was an important vote at the UNGA to debate the existing unilateral sanctions against the Republic of Cuba. Now, these sanctions have been in place for over just about 7 decades now, and the international community has been, in large majority, in condemnation of these brutal unilateral sanctions. This week, at the vote on Tuesday, 136 member states voted for this debate, a debate to end the unilateral sanctions against Cuba. Only 9 member states voted against, and 30 member states abstained. Now, the history of this type of vote, there have been non-binding resolutions at the United Nations General Assembly going back to 1992. I don't think some of the journalists here, some of them may not have even been born then. Consistently, every single year, Trinidad and Tobago, across all administrations, has found itself on the right side of these votes. Once it deals with Cuba, sanctions against Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago's position has been clear. That applied since the days, including the days of Basdio Panday, including the days of Patrick Manning, including the days of the original Kamla Persad-Bissessar under what they called a PP coalition government, certainly applied under the days of the leadership of Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. Lo and behold, in the year of our Lord 2026, Trinidad and Tobago is finding itself counted among the states that would abstain on a matter of principle so fundamental as this. The question to the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is this: why? On what basis have you changed the principal stance of Trinidad and Tobago in this manner? just to give a bit of the backdrop, Trinidad and Tobago, as I said, has always supported United Nations denouncements of the embargo. Why have we done so? Well, according to the United Nations, the embargo violates the United Nations Charter, which is an agreement which binds all member states of the UN. It also violates international law. And significantly for us, these unilateral sanctions also affect the third country's legitimate rights to engage in freedom of commerce. So I saw the Prime Minister a couple months ago saying that the sanctions are exclusively a bilateral issue between the United States and Cuba. Rubbish. According to United Nations and to anyone with an iota of sense, these sanctions also affect third countries, such as us, such as every other country in the world, besides the United States and Cuba, their freedom to legitimately engage in commerce. And that is why the United Nations General Assembly, that is why CARICOM, that is why regional and international organizations across the spectrum have always had a stake and a voice and a role and a vote in this matter. We cannot exclude ourselves, we cannot be abstaining, we cannot be fleeing the room as occurred recently. Trinidad and Tobago is looked upon as a leader. Worst yet, when we are now in the process of ascension by election to the United Nations Security Council, when other states, including those in our region, should be looking to us for clarity and leadership and principle. Is this the condition of our foreign policy today? I say shame on the government of Trinidad and Tobago. All the while, we are hosting here in Port of Spain a full ambassador from Havana. Now, we haven't reciprocated for whatever reason, and we'll get to that. Hosting here a full ambassador of Havana, and I wonder what the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs would be saying to this distinguished diplomat, given this very shameful record by Trinidad and Tobago. So this is a radical shift. And even as we are shifting, it's not as if the embargo is remaining the same. I've said it's about 7 decades now, but in the last several months, since late last year, the measures against Cuba have been intensifying and becoming even more brutal. Are there any consequences of this, Dr. Brown, that should concern Trinidad and Tobago? The answer is yes. The infant mortality rate in Cuba has now skyrocketed. This is not the Cuba on Jupiter or the Cuba in the Far East. This is the Cuba in the Caribbean Sea, one of our neighbors. It has skyrocketed. And I can give you some of the figures. The infant mortality rate in the Republic of Cuba has increased from 4.0 per 1,000 live births to 9.9 per 1,000 live births. You can do the maths. You go from 4 to 9.9 within a space of a year. So the survival of children with cancer, which is something Cuba has been very resilient on. They produce their own cancer drugs, and most of their pharmaceuticals are produced right within Cuba, but even the inputs and the ability to be resilient is now being degraded. If you don't have electricity, you can't get fuel for your power supply. How are you going to produce basic life-saving medication? The survival rate for children with cancer in Cuba has decreased from 85% to 65%. This is on our watch. When I say our watch, Trinidad and Tobago's watch, the UNC's watch, the government of Trinidad and Tobago's watch. This is happening while they're putting their hands in their pockets and betraying the principles, the hospitality, the generosity, and the conscience of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to ask every member of the media and every citizen of this country listening to us at this media conference, has there been any consultation with stakeholders in this country on this shift in position? Was this a matter that the government engaged with the population during their election campaign? Since then, over the last year, has the Prime Minister convened a media conference and explained this abysmal reversal to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to the people of CARICOM and the people of the wider Caribbean region, and even to our friends overseas? Has that ever occurred? Where is this mandate derived from, where she's not only betraying Trinidad and Tobago position, but even true UNC traditional position on these matters? These unilateral sanctions represent a clear case of collective punishment of a population, where ordinary men, women, and children, our brothers and sisters, are being punished in a most horrific manner. And it's the clearest example of this type of collective punishment, I would say, in addition to Gaza. And on that other issue, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has also been unforgivably silent. And we'll have the opportunity to say more about that in the future. So in the past year, again, the economic damage to the Cuban economy has been over $8 billion US. I don't know what country could be expected to function in those circumstances. And again, the question is, why are we in support of this? Why have we changed our position? As a little bit of a segue, it's very interesting that even under these conditions, Cuba has been doing more than its fair share in providing immediate relief to Venezuela in the aftermath of those two earthquakes. Did you hear what I said? Notwithstanding the blockade and siege with respect to fuel, food, resources, choking off of all forms of support to the Cuban people, the horror with respect to the infant mortality rate, child survival, and so many other indicators, Cuba has been doing more than its fair share for our neighbors in Venezuela in the aftermath of the June 24th earthquakes. So the government has not, we gave an example last week of how these matters should be handled, especially by a neighboring state. The Prime Minister has not convened the media conference that we called for. We saw that the day after we did the press conference here and called upon her, gave some recommendations, she ran down to Point Lisas and took some photos and so on. Do you know that none of those items from Point Lisas have arrived in Cuba, in Venezuela to this point? Not an iota of government support has arrived in Venezuela. It is our understanding that today, after 15 days since the largest humanitarian catastrophe, certainly in recent memory, occurred in the neighboring state of Venezuela, a state that relations with that state have been damaged significantly by the utterances of this government. When you would expect us to go beyond the pale to provide not just publications or social media statements, but immediate, tangible relief. 15 days later, the galleon's passage is due to depart for Venezuela. That is not good enough. That is not good enough, particularly for our nearest neighbor. Just some updated figures. The death toll is now at 3,811 persons. 16,740 have been injured. Why we're giving you these figures? Because the government is not updating. It doesn't appear to be current and concerned and connected. So here goes the opposition. 18,000 have been displaced. There have been 940 aftershocks, which continue even up to this week. There have been 855 government buildings that have been damaged. There have been 73,500 other buildings that have been damaged in Venezuela. 37,600 buildings collapsed. 55,000 persons are still indicated as missing or unaccounted for, and 87 temporary camps and temporary shelters have been erected. The damage estimate is 37 billion United States dollars, and on that dollar figure, a number of our smaller neighbors have contributed from government accounts resources out of their small capacity. Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Lucia, further away from Venezuela, with far less means than Trinidad and Tobago, less dependent with respect to their future of the energy sector and economy than we are with respect to Venezuela. They found it within their humble means to provide evidence of their solidarity from government accounts to provide in US dollars some support, 100,000, 150,000, etc. Trinidad and Tobago, as far as we've been updated, an account for the public has been opened. There's been no announcement, even of a symbolic contribution from the government to say, well, we hope the population will match this or something along those lines. Again, out of solidarity, connection with human concern, but also with respect and regard for the last year of relations, the damage done by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and our dependency for the future on Venezuela to do its part in our cross-border discussions, negotiations, etc. There'll be more to be said about that. Last week we recommended some of the field hospitals that were freely given to this country during COVID-19 and are not being utilized today to be provided to Venezuela. We've heard no update. What I can tell you is the field hospital from Barbados is currently in Venezuela today. There we are. Medical personnel, I saw the Prime Minister went to CARICOM and talked about availing the region of our medical personnel. How many of them have arrived in Venezuela 15 days after this human catastrophe? Not one. Not one. Not good enough. And as I said, even Cuba, even Haiti has sent personnel and resources already. So, very quickly, just to tie that into what transpired at CARICOM since the weekend and this week, you know, the President of the Senate would ask you to take a timeout based on that. I refer to him because I'm coming to Wade Mark shortly. Anyway, just to tie that into what happened at CARICOM this week, I saw an article, incredible really, in the Trinidad Guardian by Jesse Ramdale, July 9th, 2026, talking about the Prime Minister's utterances at the CARICOM heads meeting. And here are her words to the regional family. Whatever happens, I'm quoting, whatever happens in Venezuela happens in Trinidad and Tobago. Just last night, this is in St. Lucia, we had lengthy discussion. At 2 a.m., some heads were discussing this very matter of Venezuela, given the devastation it faces. Sounds good, working hard, 2 a.m. Listen further. First of all, this is our Prime Minister. First of all, immediately when those things happened, many of us in the region were holding meetings while it was happening and sending personnel. Which us is that? She's hiding behind the collective, referring to smaller countries with less resources and less personnel who sent personnel. We haven't sent any personnel. We in the region, were holding meetings and sending personnel. So instantly we addressed the human woes of the earthquakes. Instantly, this is Madam Auntie CARICOM, we addressed the human woes of the earthquake. This is hypocrisy on an unprecedented level. Thereafter, we worked in the region for sending relief supplies and relief personnel. Leave tonight. When I go home, we will be sending off an entire ferry. But that part is true. After 15 days, the Galleon's Passage going with supplies for the people of Venezuela. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. And then she went on to say, in the same article, Trinidad and Tobago stands ready to help address shortages of medical professionals in the region by making its pool of locally trained doctors available to fellow member states. So there's a disconnect. The Prime Minister's utterances, the reality on the ground in Venezuela, and what she's trying, the picture she's trying to paint while attending the CARICOM meeting. That immediacy of response applies to the reaction of other member states, even her closest friends and supporters. She still has a few, would admit that that immediate reaction the Prime Minister is talking about did not come from Trinidad and Tobago. And just to close off on that point, the Prime Minister and the government has been making heavy weather of the decision by CARICOM heads to seek an advisory opinion from the Caribbean Court of Justice on the process by which the Secretary General was reappointed. Not the decision to reappoint the Secretary General is not being referred anywhere. The process. The decision stands, the process is being referred. And this is being, I saw someone, very prominent individual, describing this as a diplomatic coup for Trinidad and Tobago. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was just a couple months ago, in May 2026, familiar reporter Anna Ramdas was reporting that the Prime Minister stands firm on the CARICOM dispute. Expel us if you want. This was a posture then. And she called out the disgraceful silence of CARICOM foreign ministers. The Express asked the Prime Minister, what is Trinidad and Tobago's position since the majority of states support the reappointment? The Prime Minister responded, CARICOM leaders could do as they please. We will not recognize her. That is not going to change. We do not recognize her after August 2026, our final position. And listen to this part. Asks about suggestions that the matter be taken before the Caribbean Court of Justice, the CCJ. Persad Bissessar said Trinidad, this was her response, Trinidad and Tobago does not use the CCJ as its final court of appeal, and her government will never move to make the CCJ the country's final court of appeal. She said she was unbothered. CARICOM can expel Trinidad and Tobago if they wish to do so. They are free to do so if they wish. These are her words. I'm not bothered. We've already made our position clear. Expel us from CARICOM if they wish to do so. Life goes on in Trinidad and Tobago with or without CARICOM. Is this the same person who was speaking this week in St. Lucia? Is it the same human being, we have to ask? And what is their position on the CCJ, which they're pretending to embrace today? I take you back to 2024, just a couple years ago, an article by Akash Samaru. UNC, same UNC, says no to CCJ. UNC says no to CCJ. If the government is intent on changing this country's constitution to replace the Privy Council with the CCJ The UNC says it will not receive support of the then opposition. According to opposition Senator Wade Mark, the UNC still believes the CCJ is open to political influence. Has something changed? Wade Mark, Kamla Persad Bissessar, is the CCJ still open to political influence? Are you still concerned? Hear this. This is Wade Mark, then opposition senator. They have used their influence within the judiciary, not only in TNT, but outside of it as well. That corrupt government has used the system to extend their rule and oppression and will never receive, not now, nor in the future, or support for any Caribbean court of justice. They will never receive, not now, nor in the future. I think we're in the future now compared to 2024. Not now or in the future will they receive or support for any Caribbean court of justice. Is this the same UNC and Kamla Persad Bissessar that's talking about a diplomatic coup? And the final article I want to refer to you, I'm always saddened when I refer to a Newsday article because they're no longer with us. February 2005, 3rd February, Kamla hurting over panel of CCJ judges. She criticized the composition of the CCJ. This was in the parliament, by the way. You have 6 appointed judges. We are living in a country. They are saying we're calling race, but this is blatant. Not a single one of Indo-Trinidadian or Indian origin to table thumping. And she went on and on and on. The CCJ does not reflect the composition of the people of the region. Does it now reflect the composition of the people of the region, in your opinion, Madam Prime Minister? And finally, she also criticized the process of appointment of CCJ judges. So you're criticizing the process of reappointment of the CARICOM Secretary General, all because you absented yourself from the heads retreat in Nevis. Water under the bridge, you might say. You're criticizing that, making heavy weather of that, affecting our manufacturing and our jobs and everything else. The heads have now decided to give you a face-saving measure and refer the process for an advisory opinion. But it turns out the very CCJ itself, this Prime Minister, has a problem with the process of appointment of its judges. She criticized the process of appointment of CCJ judges, saying, listen, Caribbean heads of government, the same heads, Caribbean heads of government have steadfastly taken control of the appointments, the discipline, and the removal of the president of the CCJ. The method of appointment makes its appointees susceptible to political influence. And the last quote I want to give, in the same article, she predicted that the Caribbean Court of Justice would become the Caribbean Court of Injustice. These are not the words of Penelope Beckles Robinson, the future Prime Minister. These are not the words of Amory Brown. Those are the words of Kamla Persad Bissessar. Is that the same CCJ that you are now pretending to embrace and claiming is the basis of a diplomatic coup from Trinidad and Tobago? I say shame on this Prime Minister, shame on the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The appointment of the Secretary General stands, the status quo remains. It is my hope, sincere hope, that this face-saving measure will succeed in cooling temperatures, allowing the good and important work of CARICOM to continue, notwithstanding the belligerence, the hypocrisy, the lack of principle, and the shifting tides of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown, for touching on those pertinent issues and the damage that they continue to do to the international relations of Trinidad and Tobago and our neighbors. Up next, to touch on many issues that are affecting you, the citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, we welcome the Honorable Penelope Beckles Robinson, Leader of the Opposition, Member of Parliament for Arima, and Political Leader of the People's National Movement, and future Prime Minister, to address you.
That means I should stay more on this side, right? Morning, everyone. Let me acknowledge my colleague, Senator the Honorable Dr. Amory Brown, the Honorable Brian Manning, the Honorable Hans Devines, members of the media, and of course those listening online. I know that Hans said many issues. It's just a few. But let me first start with what the opposition has decided is a water crisis in Trinidad and Tobago. That's not going to stay. Okay. Yeah. Well, let me first of all start by what we have concluded, that is we in the opposition, about a water crisis in Trinidad and Tobago. And more specifically, the northeast of Trinidad and Tobago. I have had the opportunity to speak with some of my colleagues, and I'm talking about the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, the Honorable Dominic Romain. And I can say that yesterday I had constituency office, as well as Monday, and it's the number of people that are calling me as it relates to not having water. As a matter of fact, yesterday I had a gentleman from Nelson Street in Arima indicated he hasn't had water for 16 days. People from Pinto, from Malabar, Santa Rosa Heights, several places are calling and indicating challenges for water, as well as areas of Sandy Grande, Cleaver, Lopino, several places. And it's not just a day or two, it is several days, 1 week and 2 weeks. And I'm asking the Honorable Minister to please indicate to the country whether or not there is an issue as it relates to shortage of water, particularly for persons in the Northeast. Now, I don't want to leave out my colleague, the Honorable Brian Manning from San Fernando East, because when I raised this matter this morning, he also made it very clear to me that there's a challenge of water, and he mentioned Pleasantville, Coquet, those surrounding areas where his constituents have been calling him regular as it relates to issues of water. My colleague as well here, the Honorable Hans Devines, has indicated that in his constituency of Diego Martin West, particularly areas on the hill, his constituents are indicated that water is not getting up to the hill in many parts of Diego Martin West. Now, what is interesting is that there were several projects started under the People's National Movement that this government has simply either suspended or cancelled. The intake project in Arima, the village of Aripo in Arima, that project has been cancelled. As a matter of fact, they have moved all the equipment, and following the elections of April 2025, that project has ended. They are no longer drilling wells in the Valencia and Wallerfield area where wells were being drilled. That has ended. projects in Sandy Grande, as well as delays as it relates to the Guanapo water treatment plant, as well as the North Oropouche treatment plant. And we know that from information we have of the possibility of the shutdown of the Caroni water treatment plant. And therefore, if we have this situation at this point in time, where some people are only getting water 1 day per week, 2 days per week, or in some instances, for 2 weeks, no water, I'm asking and calling on the Minister of Public Utilities to please tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago whether or not there is a water crisis in Trinidad and Tobago. I also want to make reference now as we speak, because this is really the environment, which is not an area that this government talks a lot about. But I'm following on some issues raised by the Honorable Dr. Amory Brown. Now, we are aware that there was a 7.2 and a 7.5 earthquake on the 24th of June. And many of you would be aware that Cedros was impacted by that earthquake. As a matter of fact, there has been some almost 20 feet high of land in that area. The government hasn't said anything, but why is this important? This is important because the World Meteorological Organization has said that this particular year is one of the hottest years ever in the history of their assessment as it relates to climate. And we all know that the issue of climate change is very, very important. So if you look at the recent information from India to the United States and many parts of Europe, they are indicating that within the recent past, the days has been exceptionally hot. As a matter of fact, for those of you who are following World Cup football, you would see that there's a 3 minutes hydration break. That's not by accident. I mean, some people are asking whether it is something unique, but it has to do with the heat right now that is going on in many parts of the world. So we must ask ourselves as a country, are we preparing the public for natural disasters? It's very important. And we cannot wait until something is on our door. So if the World Met Office is saying to us that this year is one of the hottest years ever, if we are seeing in many countries of the world, in many parts of the United States, in Australia, that you're having these raging fires that are almost uncontrollable, what are we doing in Trinidad and Tobago? If we have recognized that next door, Venezuela, this earthquake that took place last month, that has killed many people and destroyed a large part of the city in Venezuela, is the government of Trinidad and Tobago preparing the population for natural disasters? We forget that we are in the hurricane season. And traditionally, during the hurricane season, there would be the discussions among the population, you know, how do you prepare? I have not heard anything from this government. And even following that earthquake, you would think that some sort of discussion would be had as it relates to preparation, you know, for the public, what is likely to happen. We've never heard them even talk about Cedros, but I want to say to the people of Cedros, and as well to thank you for the information that you have been sending to us, and to let you know that the People's National Movement will soon be visiting your area. Climate change for us here in Trinidad and Tobago can impact negatively on agriculture. It can impact on the tourism sector. We may have forgotten, but COVID occurred just a couple of years ago, and the world wasn't really prepared for COVID. Are we as a country prepared for a natural disaster? And that is a question we must ask. I want to move now to the issue of the passports. And in doing so, I'm going to make reference to 2 articles. One by The Guardian, passport alarm, immigration officials warned that current stock of official TNT travel documents is running dangerously low. And the second one being Alexander denies passport stock running low. 3 vendors interested in providing e-passports. Now, why is this very important? Let us go back to the fact that one of their many decisions following the budget debate was the increase in fines. So you have a situation now where the passport, regular passport, moved from $250 to $500. The business passports moved from $350 to $700. And of course, if you want to expedite the passport, it is now $600. And please don't lose your passport, because you now have to pay some $2,000. But I talk about that in the context of this government trying to convince the population that there isn't an issue as it relates to passports. Now let me just go back quickly to the Guardian article. And the reason why I'm going back there is because it is important for us to understand a bit of history about this situation as it relates to the passport. So there is a company called the Canadian Banknote Company. What is interesting about that company is that company has been providing passports for Trinidad and Tobago for almost 2 decades. The People's National Movement, the cabinet, decided that notwithstanding the fact that that is the case, we will still go through the proper procedure of ensuring that you invite expressions of interest, and persons would have expressed their interest, and the Canadian Banknote Company was selected. October 2024, there would have been the award of the contract. This government then came into office in April of 2025 following the elections. And this government, as is customary, their practice now, canceled the contract. And of course, in canceling the contract, they then issued their expression of interest on June the 15th, 2026. And if you could allow me quickly to read it, because it's important. At this stage, the EOI has been issued to identify entities who can provide this service and are interested in moving forward with receiving the RFP for consideration. As such, no responses to technical questions or questions related to the specific project will be provided. All relevant details of the project will be provided within the request for proposal. Now, I'm going back to the point where Mr. Alexander denies passport stock running low. 3 vendors interested. Now, if you go through the facts, and I ask any of you today, simply go on the online application if you would like a date for a passport. January 2027, it's nothing novel. You could do it as you're sitting there, and you would see whether or not what I'm telling you is wrong. So how did we get to the stage where it's now literally taking 6 or 7 months for you to get a date for an appointment, when traditionally it was just about a month? How is it that it's taking long and it's shifting from 2 days to 2 weeks as it relates if you want to expedite your passport? They would have you believe that things were not in place when elections were called to address this issue. So what was happening is the government made sure that as you continue the machine-readable passports, that you move to the e-passports, so that the contract was addressing both of those issues to ensure a smooth transition. They are giving you the impression that they are, of course, very modern, and they are going to enhance the situation, and it's going to be quite different from what the PNM was doing. Absolutely false. Everything was in place. But as is customary with this government, as soon as they get into office, the first thing they would do is to cancel contracts, as they have done. I mean, you can go through the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago, whether you go to Matlot, where the bridge is, that was very important for the residents. Contract stopped, as I indicated. Many of the water projects. You go right there in Port of Spain, the building for the homeless, they have cancelled that. And that is their practice. Many housing developments cancelled almost everywhere. The EBC building project cancelled. That is their practice. So they have found themselves in a very embarrassing situation, because what did they do? As soon as you get into office, you cancel the project. And in canceling the project, you have now realized that you have a shortage of passports. And you cancel a process that was very transparent, trying to make the public feel that there's some suspicion as it relates to the company that was selected. So you cancel that award, and now you find yourself in trouble. It's not, I mean, we understand that Trinidad and Tobago passports, that in many instances when people traveled, if you go to certain parts, the UAE, a number of countries, our passport was not compatible. And therefore, the situation was one that was urgent, and we dealt with it. You cancel it. And you say to this company, we don't need you anymore, and you now have expression of interest. And I want to ask the Honorable Minister of Homeland Security to tell us whether or not oral notice was not given to the immigration to slow both on the appointments as well as the distribution of passports. That has found us in a situation now where there's panic by members of the public. But not only that, the minister must the minister must answer. Because again, this is the practice of this government. You send home on leave the chief immigration officer and the deputy chief immigration officer. So you didn't only cancel the contract, you know, but you send home the two persons that are leading the organization. I mean, what do you expect? Is anybody surprised that we have found ourselves in this predicament? As Brian said, he is. Because for him, he's saying, no stock running out. Okay, but he must tell us, if it is no stock is running out, come to the public and tell us, give us some information. How many passports are normally distributed on a daily basis? How many applications you have online? Tell us why it's taking 6 months for a person to get an appointment. And the very interesting part, of course, is to tell us about these increases in fines. Because the public of Trinidad and Tobago, you are finding yourselves in a situation where in every situation, this government has been increasing fines. And as we in the opposition have said, when everyone was waiting to get a Christmas gift, this government was busy giving us a gift of fines in virtually every area where they can tax. So the landlord and tenant, all the taxi drivers, you know, all the bars, what is the consequences of the actions of this government? You go to the market, hardly anybody to buy, goods rotting. You go to the grocery, and you ask the average citizen every single day, not only is the price of food increasing, but people simply cannot afford it. And I want to remind the public that we have found ourselves with a government that simply does not care about the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So there it is. You tell the immigration officers, please slow down, in order to deal with the mistake that you have made. And what could we call them? A government that is literally on go slow. The last area I want to deal with is the issue of the state of emergency. And I start with that because I want to share with you some important figures. Police operations 7,174, arrests 3,211, criminal charges 698, preventative detentions 465, firearms recovered 184. And this is more or less the period since this last SOE. The murder toll 199, no, I think 200, that's the last. And if you look at last year, it was about 203. So really not much different, even though they would have you believe that they have crime under control. I want to share with you some information. Now, you would recall when, some time ago, when this debate was in the parliament, that they were talking about Zoso. And they talked about the fact that most of the killings and most of the crimes are taking place. As a matter of fact, almost all taking place in PNM constituencies. You have seen within recent times, as a matter of fact, last month, in Separia, there was a double murder and a triple murder. Let us just look at the 6th of July, a Venezuelan killed at not too far from the Pinal police station. Again, security officer Stephen Jack stabbed to death in Princestown, 500 meters again from the police station. St. Madeleine, a bullet-ridden body of an unidentified man. And then, unfortunately again, because every time as a citizen you listen to these deaths, it must be very, very painful. 75-year-old Tara Bridgemohan, murdered during a violent invasion, Barapo. And what is the government saying about this? No, they will come to tell you, crime is down. The SOE, you needed the SOE. But I want to say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the question you must ask yourself, you have approximately 500 PDOs because they are utilizing this to the maximum to their benefit. Have a look at the Express, Ricky Ramdas, page 3. Have a look at it. 4 gang leaders among 19 targeted in new PDOs. Have a look at it. And I want to say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, please read this article. Because this article is going to explain to you how this government is failing on crime. And it will explain to you that something is drastically wrong about their justification for a state of emergency. If it is in this article that they can give you all the details, basically, of the offenses committed, why it is that they are only holding these people under PDOs. The government needs to tell us why, if you have all of this evidence, that these persons are not being arrested and charged. And let me just say a few to you because it's important. You are saying to us, and you give us the list of the people named, and I'm reading it here. Cleavon Oxley, also called Legs, who were both named as leaders of Building 20, who was identified as the leader of an informal criminal group operating. Identified, and they say it's identified in Orokun. Then they go on to tell you, Akinde Winchester, alleged to have been involved in a home invasion in which the property was damaged and the occupant threatened and was further linked to robbery with aggravation. All of that is here, you know. Then they go on. Notices were identified to Vialva and others as alleged affiliates of the Aruka radical Muslim gang, which authorities allege was involved in firearms and narcotics trafficking, extortion, and attacks on rival gangs. I mean, explain this to me. And they go on. Another alleged to be involved in narcotic trafficking and child pornography. Is important. Let me just go on again. Emmanuel Nelson, Building 20 gang, alleged to be an enforcer and a shooter. I mean, we could go on, you know. I need to read two more. Jodel board, because they're giving you the name, they're giving you the location, they're giving you the activity. Key participant in ongoing gun conflict involving shootings and retaliatory attacks. Now you tell me. Huh? And they identify another one, an informal group of operating in the California Couva area. The group was involved in firearms and narcotics trafficking, armed robbery, shooting, and witness intimidation, and intended to escalate attacks on business and members of the public. And another interesting one involved in firearm trafficking, shooting, and witness intimidation. I mean, please, please. Right? You have an anti-gang act. You have a firearms act. You have the state of emergency. Remember the Stand Your Ground legislation. Members of the media, can you ask them how many persons today have been charged under the Stand Your Ground legislation? I mean, how could they give us all of this information about all of these persons? And all you do is you utilize the state of emergency, right, the SOE. But I want to say to the Minister of Homeland Security that if it is you have all of this information, you must tell the public why it is none of these persons have been arrested and charged. But more importantly, members of the media and members of the public, more importantly, they must also tell us, because the last SOE ended, most of the people who were detained were never charged. The time came and they went home honky-dory. You come back and you're doing the same thing again. And I want to say to the public of Trinidad and Tobago, this is a pattern of this government. Because let us go back to the period between 2010 and 2015, when at least 10,000 persons were arrested under the state of emergency. Less than 10% were charged, and less than 2% were convicted. But millions of dollars of taxpayers' money were paid to those persons who they held during that same state of emergency. They have come back again, and they have done the identical thing. And I ask you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, can we trust this government to deal with crime? They have absolutely no plan. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, we now invite your questions. As always, we urge you to raise your hand, identify yourself and your media house, and who you would like to direct your question to, and we'll have it answered. All right, so let's begin our question and answer segment. Okay, Marie.
Hi, good day, everyone. Marie Fletcher, Guardian Media. We could start with Dr. Brown, and we'll tackle some of the CARICOM issues, right? I know you were speaking extensively on the issue of CCJ. Even yesterday, you would have commented on one of our stories for Guardian concerning that you were pleased or welcome the idea that the government is actually acknowledging or seeing the value, in your words, of the CCJ. But at the same time, we have the Prime Minister nowhere closer to accepting the court as the final court of appeal. So there are other voices, political analysts, etc., finding it to be ironic as well that the Prime Minister isn't doing so. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that, maybe more to the public, that some people may be thinking, well, maybe eventually, if she is pleased by the advisory opinion given by the CCJ, maybe she may have a change of opinion, seeing that there definitely has been a change of her view right now. Or do you just see this as, some may think, well, she wasn't being heard by some CARICOM members, so she decided to take that route.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask, or are we saying that this is just a position of convenience by the Prime Minister? I think there would have been some foundation for that limb of your question. Listen, if you're asking me to to consider the words and actions of the Prime Minister and extract some element of consistency, some element of principle, some clear trajectory that citizens could follow and connect to, that's mission impossible. This Prime Minister, especially on regional and international affairs, has been all over the map. And that has led us to ask who or what is behind some of these shifts, positions, changes, inconsistencies. Is it coming from Port of Spain? Is it coming from some other capital? Where is she deriving her advice? Who is her advisor? Obviously, it's not the ambassador to CARICOM, who is completely, maybe it's a good thing, but who is completely silent. We've seen disparities between her and the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs at several points along the way. He's also retreated into relative silence, and therefore the only voice you're hearing now is the Prime Minister, who is given generous leeway by some of those political analysts and a few other commentators to dance all over the map. And so now, after calling the Caribbean Court of Justice the Caribbean Court of Injustice, we can be served this version that the Prime Minister welcomes this matter as if this is where she was taking it all along, which, as you know as a responsible journalist, is not the case. So this is a climb down. This is a face-saving measure. As we've indicated, the Secretary General of CARICOM remains the Secretary General of CARICOM today. That August deadline with respect to the end of her first term fast approaches. That's a few weeks away. And I believe the entire regional family will continue to observe and monitor the shifting positions of the government of Trinidad and Tobago as that point approaches. Again, I remind you that what will be referred for advisory opinion is the process and not the decision of heads itself. And a further reminder, not seeking to prejudice anything with respect to that opinion, it's the identical process, as has been indicated by outgoing chairman, several other heads of CARICOM. It's the identical process for reappointment that was utilized for Erwin LaRocque, Edwin Carrington, and one of their predecessors as well. So nothing new was done. Irfan Ali said that. All the other heads have said that. Kamla Prasad Bissessar, for several months since early this year, was an outlier in the process. There was a lot of speculation as to whether she would even go to St. Lucia. I had reporters calling me day and night. Is the Prime Minister going to go talk to your sources? As if I have some magic spell in CARICOM. Talk to your friends. And we said it. We're glad that she went, because the Prime Minister of this country, no matter who or she is supposed to be at CARICOM. We don't hate the Prime Minister, you know. In fact, we speak about her with more regard than even some of her own senators have spoken about her. So these are matters of principle, and again, we will be monitoring very closely. But we cannot sit here and accept this spin doctoring and twisted version of the world where this Prime Minister sees merit in the CCJ and has wanted this matter to go there. That's contradicted by the facts, the history, and the record.
I mean, the Prime Minister did say that she does not intend to acknowledge the Secretary General as the Secretary General beyond the end of the term. And we don't expect the case to obviously be heard that soon. I mean, so do you think that without the full support of CARICOM, that the Secretary General may feel pressured to want to leave the seat on her own before we hear what the CCJ has
By
to say?
one head of government, when all the others are in full support and endorsed and participated in your reappointment? I can't predict what...
I mean, we did see Jamaica
No, Jamaica hasn't changed its position. Jamaica is Jamaica. The Prime Minister of Jamaica is the Prime Minister of Jamaica. And there's been a lot of effort, not just by him, by Mia Motley and other heads, I could tell you, to find some sort of landing pad, some sort of face-saving measure, because the region is embarrassed by the position of Kamla Persad-Bissessar and remains embarrassed and is trying to work for, not for her, not for the UNC, the solidarity of CARICOM. And that's something the PNM has always supported. So we're not trying to pour kerosene on anything. We're identifying the areas of principle, we're identifying the inconsistencies, and we do hope this matter is treated in a manner that would allow for justice, allow for the prevention of the hounding of anyone out of office, and allow for respect for the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and hopefully the government of Trinidad and Tobago to continue on the foundation that they met when they came into office with respect to the Caribbean community. There's so much work to be done, and now we're spending money because no one has spoken about how this is going to be funded. It's going to be a lot of high-level lawyers. You see what's happening even here domestically, where what might seem to be a simple case or simple advisory opinion, I can tell you, is going to involve significant resources. CARICOM is already constrained, but everyone is going beyond the boundary, beyond the call, to try to preserve CARICOM unity, solidarity, notwithstanding the presence of the most belligerent head that the region has ever seen, sadly, our own Prime Minister.
And when it comes to the interpretation of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, those were some of the concerns that the Prime Minister had. When it comes to the issue of whether or not it should be heads only for certain things, or we should have representatives, I mean, you were present for many of these events and stuff. When it comes to summits, when it comes to whether or not a vote was publicly announced, it was part of an agenda, what's your view on that? Because that's where the contention began in the first place.
There's no real contention about that. Let me try to boil this down to you as simply as possible. And you saw the stark contradiction between what Minister Sean Sobers was saying and the chairman of CARICOM, Dr. Terence Drew, the distinguished Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, was saying. We're going to have to pick a side between those two individuals. The fact of the matter, all of this boils down not to who was excluded, but to who decided to leave that country prematurely. That was one person, Kamla Persad-Bissessar. If she had done her job that we elected her to do, and that we pay her a lot of money to do, she would have stayed for the duration of that meeting and that retreat, represented the people of this country, and sat in that room in Nevis, contributed, argued, deliberated, discussed, which is what every other head who was present did. We would not be having this discussion now. We would probably be talking about the cracks in Cedros, we'd be talking about water or something else. It is her willful, unexplained, and deliberate action, leaving the same day that the Secretary of State left St. Kitts and Nevis, jumped on an aircraft and left, and then has created a whole false controversy, fake reality, dragged Sean Sobers and everyone else into it. Excuses galore, who's seasick, who's not seasick, who went down to Nelson Island. Rubbish. Just for the sake of a cover story for the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. It's very sad, and now resources are going into this when this is a simple and routine matter of reappointment, which has been done multiple times in the past with no objection from any former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Storm in a teacup, UNC style.
I mean, a couple of months ago, we saw the Prime Minister anti-CARICOM, as you would have mentioned. And then now we're seeing the Prime Minister and all these lovely photos and videos, whether it is with Prime Minister Mia Motley, even with the chair, Dr. Barnett herself. I mean, do you think those are just photo ops? How do you think, what do you think is taking place right now? We've
Well,
seen some
there's two
unified-
options. One is this is just PR, convenience.
I mean, she's not forcing them to take the photo.
Right.
with her,
This
so-
is just one option is PR convenience. The other option is that the Prime Minister has had some sort of brain transplant or personality transplant, and she is now a sincere member of the CARICOM family. I don't know if you want me or anyone wants me to go back into the record to see some of the things she said about CARICOM not 5 years ago. This year in 2026, some of the accusations she leveled against her fellow heads are very, very, very serious. And some of the disrespect she leveraged against the same Dr. Carla Barnett, including not even recognizing her during the opportunity that was granted to her generously to address the heads meeting in St. Kitts and Nevis. Don't get me started on that. So I give you those two options. And listen, sometimes you have to be able to let bygones be bygones. And notwithstanding all of the water under the bridge, at some point in the reasonable future, this country will be called upon to chair CARICOM. There's a rotation. And therefore, it would be very interesting that cooler heads, more mature heads, wiser heads will have to prevail, and persons will have to be able to work together, including Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, if she's still the Prime Minister then, and the Secretary General of CARICOM, if she's still the Secretary General at that point.
We saw another story coming out that the Prime Minister agreed to explore the use of one of our ferries. We saw that Prime Minister Mia Mottley announced that Trinidad and Tobago will play a key role in advancing the long-awaited intra-regional ferry service. I mean, seeing that the fact that we've had a lot of issues with our ferries, both under both governments, this government and the previous government, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so on the issue of a regional ferry service, I would take that far outside of partisan politics, party politics. That is very, very vital for the Caribbean region. And I would say her fellow heads, CARICOM heads, have demonstrated great faith and optimism in its reliance on Trinidad and Tobago under this current government. I wish for the best in that process, and I hope it's successful and can bring us further along. What I would say, when we looked at the Prime Minister's output in preparing to go to St. Lucia, and they put out some talking points, matters that she will raise, and we saw regional security. Right at the end, a few lines, and I will have to make the point, this Prime Minister has a responsibility for regional security within the CARICOM quasi-government, quasi-cabinet. She's failed abysmally and has not reported either to CARICOM or to the people of this country on that responsibility. Now it seems, I don't know if it's an addition to, another responsibility has been placed on her shoulders. I hope she conducts this one in a far better and responsible manner than she's treated with the issue of regional security. You don't want me to revisit that. It's been a disaster for all to see, including her flagrant and ongoing disregard for international law and the principles of the UN Charter.
Final question for you. Diplomatic passports. I know that you would have mentioned that you would have given back your diplomatic passport at the end of your term, but it was clear that other persons of the PNM did not, and then it had to be removed, and we heard that even when former Prime Minister Dr. Rowley returned, it was expected that his would be removed as well. Are there any other members of the PNM that would have had diplomatic passports that would have been told that they had to give it back or anything?
So,
I mean, you would have been aware of the list. She's Prime Minister said it's over 900 and something persons.
well, I'm not aware of a list. I'm aware of the issue, and we would have spoken to this in the past. I don't want to go too far on this matter. I can speak for my own experience. As Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs for a 5-year period, it would have been called upon me, was my duty to treat with the sensitive issue of recall of some passports from former office holders who became ineligible by virtue of the fact that they no longer held that office. I don't want to give any specific examples right now because these are matters that the state treats with all the time. The fact that it has now become a talking point and a national issue tells me that it is not currently being handled with the relevant maturity and respect and sensitivity. So in a case like this, you have the unfortunate matter with a former prime minister saying that it wasn't treated with in a formal manner, he received no correspondence, he got some signal or message. It should not even get to that. In my own case, I could tell you, it's public record, and I communicated with the leader of the opposition when, after the general election, I certainly was aware that because it says in the diplomatic passport, the bearer is a minister of government of Trinidad and Tobago. After April 28th, I was not a minister in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I returned the passport and very quickly thereafter received an official passport, which I use to this day, and it is of good assistance. There are some offices within Trinidad and Tobago that, according to cabinet policy, would come with a diplomatic passport. It's my understanding, leader of the opposition, and that's appropriate. So if cabinet changes its position at any time, which is its right to do, the cabinet has that power. The question is, how is that being implemented? How is that being communicated? And how are the staff being directed to go about it? If it results in disrespect to office holders or former office holders or perceived disrespect, it tells me something is going wrong. And if you're looking for malice and disrespect, usually you can look no further than the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago.
But I mean, since you decided to give back yours because you would have seen what was written on anything, why didn't you give advice to MP Young to return his as well?
Well, I think that question is a little bit of a baited question, and it assumes that I have knowledge of what passport any other member has. What I can tell you without fear of contradiction is that in a general sense with respect to ministers of government, there is and was awareness and even some communication with respect to former ministers of government that you should return your diplomatic
But he did say he
passport.
received it because he was appointed prime minister. So, I mean, a few days later, he could have given him the advice.
I can't speak to that
Okay.
because I was not appointed prime minister of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
There you go.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shailen Ramsibag, Trinidad Express. So as we're on that topic, is it the norm, excuse me, please? Is it the norm for a retired prime minister to have an official passport, or is that something that is new?
When you say an official, are you referring to a diplomatic or official passport?
Well, they said that they were rescinding the diplomatic and issuing an official. So is that the norm, or is that something in your...
I would say it is not without precedent that former office holders, and you'd have seen even a former president of Trinidad and Tobago indicating that there is some precedent and foundation, and it has occurred where former holders of the highest offices would have been afforded the privilege of holding or retaining a diplomatic passport even after they demitted office. So that's a fact. As I said, and as we have said, the cabinet can change its policy at any time. The question is how that is done, how that is implemented, and the example that they would be giving to the rest of the country. If the example they want to give is disregard and disrespect to offices and who held offices and who would have held offices, what kind of society are they contributing to? Simple matter of principle.
Madam Opposition opposition leader. So what I have to ask is not really anything that you would have discussed today,
Sure.
but concerns raised by PNM stalwart, Mr. Ashton Ford. He would have said that he expressed concerns within the operations of the executive, the party executive, was it the council? And I saw a response from Mr. Gonzalez saying that, they're going to reach out, the party is going to reach out to him on the matter to, speak about his concerns. Has that been done, and what is your response to some of the concerns that you would have read, that he would have raised?
Okay, so that, yes, the chairman of the party indicated that he would reach out to Mr. Ford, and yes, that will be done.
Can you tell us when that will be done? I mean, he writing a remark.
He's writing a REMA, yes, but the chairman of the party holds a particular position for a particular reason, and he will reach out to him.
What was
I don't propose to comment anymore on that, save and accept. I mean, we have a leadership meeting this evening, and we would also, in terms of what the chairman indicated, we would also discuss with the chairman exactly, how the approach will be done.
Okay, sure, no problem. You were speaking about the state of emergency and the government's use or misuse of the PDOs, right? We see right now that Blue Water's owner, Dominic Hadid, and his wife are among some persons that were detained, not charged for any particular thing. And there is a rhetoric by some members of the government that they are friends of the PNM. What's your response to that?
What my response to what, as to whether they are friends of the PNM?
Of the PNM.
Well, listen, I mean, I don't know in what context they want to say that, but I will be very careful to comment on that. That matter, as I understand it, is still before the court, and therefore I do not propose to comment on it, right? But it is not unheard of, unusual that the Prime Minister, since as it relates to Venezuela and the narco trafficking, has been making all sorts of statements about the PNM. As the political leader of the People's National Movement, I will say very proudly that our party has always had a position as it relates to Balize House, which is where I think, a lot of people want to head. That property was purchased. There's a deed for that property. And therefore, when we sat in the Parliament and we heard both the Prime Minister and the Attorney General making all sorts of statements, about, if you don't basically, listen and take no tetron away to you, and to say they are friends of the PNM because they want to create certain kinds of linkages and impression. And let me just say this. In all societies, in all communities, in all countries, you have people, when you paint everybody with a brush, which is what this government is trying to do, and say that this particular group is either corrupt or involved in drugs, I mean, people should always be careful about what they say. Today for me, tomorrow for you. So this issue of wanting to link us directly and to say, the PNM, basically, that the party, and we are associated, and we're involved in drugs, and we're involved in narco trafficking. The Prime Minister needs to be very careful about this brush that they are painting. And a lot of what they are saying, they say it under the cover of parliamentary privilege. And that is the big difference. Yes.
Good afternoon, Opposition Leader Kevin Henry. I just wanted to ask if any media review, because you were talking about water for your constituents and other constituencies, in the media review, did they at any point, the government at any point in time, had a budget towards the water contribution of water and budget projects and stuff like that?
Well, there was the water improvement program, which as far as I know has been cancelled. Okay. That's my information. That has been cancelled. But notice I made reference to the fact that they have cancelled several projects. Like, in a similar vein, in other words, contracts were awarded. I mean, I can see as a fact, a repo, 2 weeks after they started, they just remove everything, right, as it relates to the two important projects of the Guanapo water treatment, as well as the North Urupuch. There have been delays. They were drilling wells in Valencia, and Wallerfield, and those have been stopped.
Well, I know
Right.
that MP Manning would have brought up the issue in the last budget debate, asking the Minister of Public Utilities, Mr. Barry Padarat, about a project in his community,
Well, I'll ask
if it's going to be
Mr.
continued.
MP.
If it's going to be continued. And I think he would have answered and said to him, yes, Mr. Manning, is that project still going on?
Well, they have said that the minister in the Ministry of Public Utilities stood in the Parliament and read out a list of exactly what the project entailed, and he said that the project was being continued. But since that day and time, we have heard nothing about it. We saw no funding being put towards that program, and no works have begun that we have seen. So they're saying one thing. The Minister of Public Utilities last year said before the end of the term, end of the fiscal year, the water improvement program for Pleasantville would have been completed. And it has not to date. And then in the mid-year review, we spoke with the minister in the ministry. He said it had started, and we have seen nothing to suggest that the program has started.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manning. Opposition Leader, the PNM has won court matters where for 2015 elections, the PNM has won court matters where the UNC would have brought towards the court saying that there was some sort of election mishap, and the PNM won matters where the courts have awarded the PNM money for, situations that they're claiming happened that didn't happen. Has the PNM gotten those monies from the UNC?
No, we
Is the
have
PNM?
not gotten those monies, but I'm saying to you that is a matter the leadership is addressing, and I wouldn't want to say any more at this time.
Beautiful. All right. The other last question I want to throw at you is, I have been
Don't
listening.
throw it. Don't throw it.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I've been listening to Mr. Edie Stewart, the Nurses Association, saying that nurses are on 1 month contract. They have been on contracts for years. They would have won a court matter. And this government is now doing the same thing, where they are giving them short-term contracts. And I am asking, is the PNM considering, if they return into office, making nurses permanent employees?
Well, let me say that is not, it's not a matter that I can say definitely what the approach will do, but what I'm saying, it was a matter that was under consideration in terms of terms and conditions, because I addressed it probably like about 2 months ago, because you would recall that the nurses marched, both at Mount Hope as well as in Port of Spain as it relates to terms and conditions, and the fact that this government took a position where they were no longer getting their allowances. So it is something that was under active consideration, and it is certainly something, as it relates to terms and conditions, that we will be willing to meet with the Nursing Association. Anything else?
I just want to say, I know that you said that you would not speak on it, but MP Manning's name was brought up in some of the concerns that Mr. Ford had to say. I wanted to find out whether or not he was surprised to hear that his name was called. He's concerned about these his issues being addressed at executive level, etc.
Listen, let me say this. We had our General Council meeting last week. Mr. Manning expressed his concerns, letters were written, and we dealt with it as a party. We have appointed a committee to address that matter, and therefore, as it relates to party business and party matters, we have an approach and a procedure as a party 70 years old that we treat with matters, and we are doing precisely that.
I have a question. That's
Sure.
Anything you'd like to say to supporters that we have been concerned, because of course Mr. Ford is a long-standing stalwart of the party. So when he speaks things and he says it publicly, some persons will take what he says to heart, right? So is there any concern for persons that may be confused about what's going on in the party, or concerned about, the internal affairs of the party? What would you have to say to supporters?
I'll say to you that this party celebrates 70 years today. we have withstood many challenges. We have had, I mean, I myself challenged for the leadership in 2014 and lost. Dr. Rowley challenged and lost. And from time to time, particularly when you're in opposition, you're going to have challenges. You know, when you have lost elections, people are going to be concerned about a number of things. It takes a little while for regrouping. I mean, I've been there in Balizé House when we were in opposition, and at times, even to get a quorum for a meeting when we're in opposition was a challenge. We don't have, I would say at this point in time, that is not the case. But in opposition, you recognize that you have to do things differently. I've made it very clear that we're in opposition, and people don't like me to say it, but the point about it is we have made some mistakes. And in doing that, you have to move forward. I mean, there are opportunities. The legislative group is meeting, the leadership is meeting, your central executive is meeting. I was in Tunapuna last week. You're going to constituencies. I mean, I've been to Moruga, I've been to St. Joseph, I've been to Faizabad, I've been to Point Fortin, I've been to Labre, I've been to Mayaru, I've been to Tobago. So the point about it is you have to do a lot more listening, right? But you have to have an avenue where people feel that they can write to the party, write to the leadership. I mean, as a leader, I have an office there. I see members of the public, but I'm conscious of the fact that in opposition, people have concerns. And I mean, because of what you're seeing, so many people have lost their jobs, you know. I mean, you are seeing that more and more people. Okay, let's give an example. If Mr. Manning spoke, if Han spoke, I spoke. Now we are in vacation time. I mean, it is painful. There are the number of people who are not employed that are coming to you as a member of parliament for school books. I mean, a lot of them from your own party. And they would, I'm sure if they both spoke to you, Brian and Hans, they would tell you that you have to go into your own pocket, right? All the time. I mean, for activities. So the fact is that we as a party must have procedures where people believe, listen, if I'm not happy with something, I'm going to write to you. And I mean, the procedure may not be perfect and they may not be always happy with it, but the point is, as a 70-year-old party, we have a constitution, and from time to time we make amendments to those constitution. And whenever there's a challenge, it is my responsibility as a leader, and you have the leadership, you have a general council, a central executive, to let people know, listen, we are listening to you, and we are going to put in place the best possible mechanism to listen where necessary, to investigate, and in concluding the investigations, if there are actions to be taken, we take those actions. You're most welcome.
So members of the media, we want to thank you for your attendance today. We want to thank all members present. We want to remind you that we, the opposition of Trinidad and Tobago, we stand in defense of democracy and in defense of the people. We thank you. May God continue to bless each and every one of you. May God continue to bless Trinidad and Tobago.